Alrighty. Welcome everyone to Tuesday Talks. We're so delighted that you're joining us. And if this is your first time joining us on Tuesday Talks, we have a couple like nuts and bolts I'll go through real quick. If you need Chinese translation, 如果你需要中文翻译的话, we do have another streaming service that I will put in the chat right now. So if you need Chinese or Korean, we do have people on the other streaming services who are going to be chatting in the chat box. So definitely go there if you need to. And we also will be playing Spot Mr. View. He may or may not show up in my window, or he may or may not show up in another window. So put your view on gallery so you can see all of our videos, because at any point, Mr. View might show up. And if Mr. View does show up, you need to take a screenshot. And once you take a screenshot, we send it to contact@initialview.com and you might win a prize. So I'm just going to make sure that all my team is ready to go here. And if you could go ahead and open up your Q&A box if you're in Zoom, and also your chat box, because we are going to do a lot of interaction today. So I want to make sure that you are ready to type and that you are ready to ask questions. And I know many of you already have questions because the whole term of Sapien skills or soft skills might be foreign to you. So if you have questions already, go ahead and type them in the box, because we definitely want to make sure that we get to those in our conversation. But this today is going to be very much a conversation. So do participate as much as you can. I am going to share a screen real quick, just in case I see somebody asking about the Chinese. So if you, 如果需要中文的话，你可以扫这个二维码。All right, and special thanks to all the sponsor schools. We're really, we could only be doing Tuesday Talks because of your support. So thank you so much for telling your community about Tuesday Talks and for joining us every week. We're so glad you're here. And keep telling people about it, because we will have more to talk about. I'm sure based on what we're talking about today, there will be more questions and more things to talk about. So without further ado, I am delighted to welcome my guests today. They are from two very amazing institutions. They're very different from each other institution-wise, but they are, I've had the pleasure of kind of working with them on several presentations, several talks, and have gotten to know them a little bit over the years. So thank you so much, Nick and Karen, for joining us. Do you guys mind just introducing yourselves real quick? Nick, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Igo. I'm Assistant Director of Admissions with Johns Hopkins University. I'm wearing my Hopkins lacrosse shirt today, as well as representing Under Armour, which is our athletic company based in Baltimore. But happy to be here, happy as always to support this work, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Karen McCleary. I'm an Associate Director of Admissions at Barnard College. Again, I echo Nick and just say that really happy to be here today. Looking forward to these conversations.
Amazing. Okay, so I'm going to put up a poll real quick. And just so that I know where our audience is, so if you don't mind going to the poll, you see it coming up, making sure you answer this question of where you are in this process, kind of who are you? And let's just give it a second here. Excuse me. And while we're doing that, I'm going to show the QR code one more time for some people. All right, this is great. It looks like there are a lot of people right in the thick of it who are applying to college in the fall, but it's a good mix as well. And so we're glad to know this as we start. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a question that I'd like everybody to chat, to answer in the chat. And this is a, why do you want to go to college? So go ahead and type in the chat why you want to go to college. Don't be shy. Everybody know where the chat box is? All right. People want to go to college because they want a better future. Great. What else? To help you in your career, to develop your skill sets. This is awesome. To pursue further education and open more chances for me in the future. To do research, to seek a better occupation. Wow, this is great. To get a PhD, to explore different fields of study and find my passion, more money in the future, for pride, for a diverse environment, to learn how to think, to learn more what I'm interested in, find a good job, more knowledge and skill for future research or work, to challenge myself and to develop my potential, to learn more. These are great. These are great. Amazing. Okay, so the next question is, what is the thing you think is the most important component in your college application? Go. Your activities list, okay. GPA, SAT, GPA, personal statement, GPA and activities, GPA, then personal response, essay and GPA, the transcript and essay, personal statement, ability. Okay, there's a lot of different answers for this. Enthusiasm. All right, great. We're going to talk about some of these things in a minute here. But today, as you have seen, we have this title for this session is Sapien skills. And at initial view, we call them Sapien skills because they're skills that only humans have and robots don't. And so aside from your raw intellectual ability, what do you think is an example of a skill you think is important for success? And as you type these, I'm going to actually type these in as well, because we're going to kind of keep track of what people say, because I'm going to ask our guests today about what they think about these skills. So I'll go ahead. Thank you for typing, and I'll go ahead and type in. And if Nick and Karen want to yell out to me too, in case I'm not getting them.
Motivation.
I saw emotional intelligence.
That's a good one. Leadership. Ooh, self-regulation. I like that one.
There's a lot here. Flexibility in thinking.
Common sense. I do like that one as well.
Caring about others. That one's nice.
Perseverance and diligence, something in that vein as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, time management. Lots of good ones here.
Mm-hmm. Empathy, open-mindedness.
I saw teamwork or something related to teamwork. So maybe like something collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
So good.
There's
You're
so
not
many.
even a room.
They're going off the page.
You're going off the page.
Curiosity. Mm-hmm.
All right, this is a great list. I think there's some more problem solving. All right, this is great. I'm gonna pause here because there's like so much, but I'm so excited that there's so much engagement. Thank you so much for putting in these things. So of these skills, we talked earlier about kind of what is the most important part of your application? What is the most important component of application? So I wanted to let Nick and Karen talk a little bit about, based on what we saw just now of all the things, these skills that people think are important for success, where might you see those in the application? And we have used this puzzle before in many of our Tuesday talks. This might be the first time some of you are seeing this puzzle. This is some of the components, but actually, I think most of the components are there. Nick, Karen, are most of the components there on this puzzle? But we've had this conversation about this puzzle doesn't always look the same, and the puzzle piece sizes don't always look the same. But maybe either of you, could you touch on where you might see the skills that we just talked about in this puzzle or in the application?
So if we're going to be, I think, technical, right, the best answer of any admissions officer is going to be, it depends. And I think the really exciting part of using this, puzzle piece metaphor as an example of holistic admissions, right? Gloria, you were saying how each puzzle piece has different sizes for different people. At the end of the day, we just want to admit students whose pictures are complete, right? We don't want to miss or admit a student who has missing pieces in their puzzle. But these skills can really be reflected across many different sections of the application, depending on where you feel it will be best highlighted for yourself, right? So it could very well be in the extracurriculars lists, right? That's where you're going to get a lot of those leadership experiences. But if you're someone who really wants to articulate it in a very different way or reflect on those types of experiences, your essays actually might be a great place to hone in on a few of those Sapien skills, right? Worker valued skills, soft skills. Your interviews are going to be a great way to talk about these things, right? I think the very first one at the top is communication. Fundamentally, an interview is assessing your ability to communicate a story, communicate about yourself. In all, though, your application is that same test, right? It's your ability to communicate your achievements in relationship to your interests, to your environment, the perspectives that you've had, and how those things relate to the next step of your academic and professional career. I would actually say your transcript still can show us a little bit of diligence. It can show us perseverance. It can show us some of those soft skills, but it's harder to interpret them, right? We're making a lot of assumptions, and we try not to do that as much in the admissions process because assumptions can lead down paths that may or may not be true, right? But your transcript can show your ability to overcome a challenge. Something that, or I guess maybe a question to the audience, let's see, do you think that there's something on here that doesn't show a soft skill or something that cannot have the potential to show a soft skill? And if so, what section of the application?
Test scores?
I think so, right? It's probably the most quintessential of the hard skills. Yes, we can make an argument that diligence, perseverance kind of come from test scores, but we have no idea, right? There's no other context around that number that we receive on the admissions end to understand how you prepared, the types of things you had to do to prepare for it, right? Some students never prepare and take it once and seemingly do really well, right? We never know that student versus the student who's been studying for hours. So the rest of your application provides you with all of that context, the ability to provide that information. And so the best answer is it depends, right? What skills do you want to highlight, and how does the rest of your application help showcase those different things?
Yeah, and I would just highlight too the activities section as well. I think this is a really great section where you can show not just how you spent your time, what you've been doing, but really what you've gained from it, either the experiences or the things that you've learned, but then also those skills that you've gained, right? Like, how have you had a chance to practice some of these soft skills, whether they're leadership or communication in the activities that you've participated in. And this can definitely look like, if you are president of a club, I think that's a pretty clear example of leadership. But I would also encourage you to think about these soft skills in more non-traditional ways. If you are a member of a club, how are you still contributing to that process, to being a productive club member, to moving whatever mission it has forward? And you can absolutely be doing that even without a leadership title. So I would encourage you to think creatively, another soft skill, about the things that you have been participating in and how they might add to your application, what you want to tell the admissions officers about them.
So this is great. I'm gonna just kind of pick one of these to talk about first. So let's say one of the ones we talked about this a little bit about, but diligence and maybe time management. So give me an example of where you would see time management and how it could come across in an application.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to the activities list, right? You're going to tell us not just what you've been doing, but how much time you've spent on the activity as well. Certainly how many years you've been participating in it, but then hours per week. And if we see that you're doing, 2 hours a week here, 3 hours a week there, we see those hours start to add up and we say, oh, wow, they're balancing a lot on their plate, along with, of course, going to school. And I would encourage you also to include things that you spend time on that are not clubs and activities, like, any sort of part-time jobs or family responsibilities, because that's part of your time management skills as well. So by showing us how much time you spent on each activity, that shows us how well you're able to balance all of those different pieces in your life.
What I would add on to that too, knowing this audience and how prolific many of students who are interested in studying in the United States are in their extracurricular pursuits, the level of commitment that we see from students, more does not mean you're time managing well. And so what we're looking for is evidence of how you're selecting the things that you're doing and then meaningfully contributing to them while balancing your other responsibilities, right? And so a question we always get is, how many extracurriculars makes me the most competitive? How many hours of community service do I need to do, right? Those are the wrong questions, right? What we're thinking about is, how did you balance all of those things to make a meaningful contribution to each of them, right? And so it's less the hard skill of how many hours spent, how many years of your life committed, but more so the flip of it. Why was that experience better, right? Quality over quantity. And so it's really important to distinguish time management there, because I think many students will hear our answers and then say, oh, I need to do more things, and then just prove to them I can do more things. Mm-hmm. Doing more things is not time management, right? Time management is knowing that you have a limited fixed amount of time with your life. We know that you're in school for many hours a day. You're studying for your in-school exams and grades, right? You have family responsibilities, which are a huge one. You also need to sleep and eat throughout your day, right? Time management does not mean sacrificing these other important key parts of your life. And so what we're looking for is evidence of you as a person being able to balance these different commitments in a meaningful and contributive way, right? More is not always more. More is sometimes detrimental, right, to your time management. It can be detrimental to your physical and mental health, right? What we're looking for is evidence of the mature student who knows how to self-advocate, right? How time management also is contingent on how you work with other people, right? How all of these different things relate to other skills that you can develop as well.
This is great. So we have done Tuesday Talks before in the past, where we've kind of talked a little bit about holistic review. We've talked a little bit about fit. And obviously the thing that kind of bubbles up to the top is that academic fit is a very, very important part of the college admissions process. So there is a kind of a bare minimum of academic ability that has to be there on the application before you can kind of talk about the soft skills on some level. that being said, how does one kind of figure out, are there soft skills that are universal to every single school? And then are there soft skills that are unique to an institution in terms of aligning kind of with your values or your community that you're trying to build? And how does a student kind of think through that? Is it, and I hate that we are kind of talking in this direction. I know people are here because they're concerned about the college admissions process. I guess in your answer, maybe blow that out a little bit and say, okay, you guys all just gave lots of good reasons for going to college, and they don't have to do with the college admissions process. They have to do with your success in the future. So, but speak to a little bit of like, how does one kind of think about what soft skills are important to develop, and whether or not it is for everything, and whether or not it is, unique to you.
That's I think, a really good question. A very philosophical one, right? A space that we oftentimes don't enter when we're talking or doing these types of presentations. So I do appreciate the opportunity for us to unpack that with some time. The correct answer is it depends, because that's everything in admissions. But I think, we're gonna spend some time to unpack that. Soft skills and your development of the skills that you really want to showcase, there's two very distinct paths that you need to balance, right? You need to be doing those things for yourself first and foremost. And so that is one path forward that you need to consider, right? Because those are your priorities. Those are the things that are helping you carve out your interests, your niche, right? Several of you mentioned in the chat at one point, right, that we are looking for individualization, or we're trying to get your personality. Your personality shines through in the ways that you're prioritizing different types of skill building, right? Other people are going to prioritize one thing, and you might prioritize something else. That's a differentiating factor. That shows your personality in terms of how you're investing in yourself. That's very, very important, because this process begins and ends, right? You don't deal with college admissions for the rest of your life. You bring these skills with you for the rest of your life. So it's important to invest in these beyond just this process, right? There's sapien skills because you're a human until you die, right? You are going to be investing in these experiences. On the flip side of that, you should be thinking about your college list, first looking at schools that will help you elevate the skills you want to invest in, right? And so it's a two-way street. Universities want students that align with their values, but you should be choosing schools that align with yours. And oftentimes a good place to find those values are through these skill sets that you're developing already in college, through the sapien skills, the soft skills that you're excited about developing, right? Not everyone wants to be a visible leader, right? But some people really want to be a meaningful team member or contributor to a group, right? But not everyone wants to do that either, right? I think I just froze a little bit. That's okay. And so it's really important to reflect on where your values are. If you're doing that search process right, those values should be aligning with the schools that are on that list, right? It's a self-selecting group. And so I don't think the best advice would be to say you need to align yourself to a fixed group of schools, right? It needs to start with, what are the skill sets you want to develop? What are the schools going to offer you in terms of developing those skills when you arrive there? And I think crafting that list will be a self-selecting process which will only be a means to an end for many of you, right? Doing it right, choosing the right schools, then applying and continuing to develop those skills is ultimately what we think about when we think of fit, right? That's why we differentiate different types of students who look the exact same way on paper, right? Because those students are developing in different ways, and our school will develop those. My institution, other institutions will develop those students in different ways. All skills are equally valuable. And so we're not going to say there's, a value proposition or a value sell on all of these different types of soft skills. All of these are are very important in life, right? We offer different resources to support those skill building in different ways. So think of it less as we care less about these soft skills or these soft skills. We just are going to have different allocations of resources to support different skill building when you arrive at our respective institutions, whatever schools you're interested in.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think I see a lot of questions that sort of indicate to me that students are wanting to almost mold themselves to fit whatever school they're talking to. And if you try to do that, then at the end of the day, no one's going to be happy. You know, if you end up trying to craft yourself for, Barnard, for example, and then you get into Barnard and you're like, oh, wait a second, this isn't actually what I want out of a college experience, or these aren't the things that I value, then, you're not going to have a good college experience. And that's certainly not what we want. So whenever people ask for what we're looking for in an application, what sort of skills we're looking for, I always say that we're looking for you. We're looking for whoever you genuinely are. And if that's a fit with our institution, fantastic. And if not, there's another institution out there who is going to give you those, like Nick said, the resources to develop the skills that you're particularly interested in. So as you're doing this research, as you're learning about other schools, really trying to talk, if possible, with students in them. I know a lot of us are still continuing to do these virtual opportunities to connect with students, and hearing from them what their experiences are at the schools, sort of what values they have, what skills they are pursuing, and identifying and helping to grow through the institution. And if that sounds like something that aligns with your interests, then that might be a good sign to put that school on your list. But if not, no matter what school this is, no matter what name it has, no matter what ranking it has, I would encourage you to rethink that, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that your experience at our school is going to be a positive one. And that's where that comes to those skills and values.
So let me, thank you for helping me unpack that. I mean, it was a very complex question, and I think you're right. Like, it's a philosophical one, and something that we need to keep thinking about. So I'm like, let's take a step back here, and I'm just going to ask you all, now that you've been out of college for a while, like, what are the skill sets? Like, what are some of the skills that you have right now that you are really helpful for your job and for your success, and that you wish that maybe you had developed a little bit earlier, maybe even before college or during college?
I think communication jumps right to the top of my mind. If you had told me when I was in high school that I was going to be doing this for a living, I was going to be speaking in front of people, whether that's virtually or in person, I would have just never believed you in the world. I was very introverted, very much hated public speaking. But it was really in college when, I had the classic story of an admissions officer. I signed up to be a tour guide at my institution, and the rest was history. And between that and, lots of extracurricular and also curricular activities, I was able to sort of find my voice. And that's something that is, I think, really invaluable, not just in my professional life, but my personal life as well. So that's a big one for me. I'm sure there are just a million others too.
I think many admissions officers share that communication thread, because that was the first one that immediately jumped up to me as well. Crippling fear of public speaking in high school, and then you get to college and realize that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of life, and how that can open other doors. I think for me, the one that kind of always stuck out, was just academic curiosity, and I don't want to say research because it's a little bit bigger than research, but like a very meticulous approach to hypothesizing, executing, and assessing things has been really helpful in this current role that I think university helped establish, right? Many students said they wanted to go to college for research, right? In the chat, I would actually push back and say, why do you want to do research, right? So the answer to the first question is actually the answer to why do you want to do research, right? That's why you want to go to college, because research is the means to the end of that skill set. And it's, for me, it was the very technical skill set of, having an idea, executing an experiment around it, and, assessing those results. And true business people, true leaders within their industries are doing those things, right? They're innovators. They're thinking about how different things are going to have different results, but they're executing tests, right? They're taking risks in a measured capacity. And I think in higher education, we're always doing that. We're always trying to do new things. We're always trying to get in front of new groups of students. We're always trying to communicate differently to those students. And I think those types of very procedural thought processes, but openness to innovation has really carried me successfully. And I know that that's a skill that's valued across many different industries. So wherever any of you might be interested in, right, whether it's education or not, the ability to parse through those things would be really helpful, right? And again, as you're probably gleaning from both Karen and myself, we probably all do those things in different ways in different packages, right? And so it's how you kind of can couple the different skills that you're excited about relative to the industry you want to join, to really kind of propel yourself forward.
On the flip side, is there something that you spent too much time doing in high school that right now you're like, none of that matters to me right now? Like, it doesn't impact my success in my career, it doesn't impact my success in my relationships, it doesn't, is there anything that you kind of like felt like, oh, I wish I kind of didn't spend as much time worrying about that?
High school level awards, right? This obsession with wanting to fill your trophy case because it looks great and you don't have anything else to measure yourself against, right? Until you come home 5 years after college and realize that those things didn't contribute to where you are now, right? I think in many cases, the holistic admissions process has fueled a very individualized approach to admissions, right? We always talk about collaboration and teamwork, but everyone's still in the back of their mind is like, yeah, they say that, but I need to be the best, right? They're only admitting this GPA. We see the questions you guys are sending us. We know what you're thinking about, right? Even though we're telling you the answer, we know what you're thinking about and prioritizing. That type of approach just doesn't serve you as soon as you get to college. It just doesn't serve you anymore. And it doesn't serve you in the workplace, right? Workplaces don't assume you're going to be the only single meaningful contributor, right? And how everyone else is supporting you. That's not how that works, right? This is very much a collaborative post educational experience. And so I think that fixation on the self is one that's really easy to do in high school. And it takes a lot of work to unpack that, especially if you've got those habits, but it just doesn't serve you. And again, I think it speaks to the holistic part of this process, right? This is not a meritocratic process, right? We don't track the number of awards and admit the students with the best number of awards, right? We're actively having conversations like this conversation today, right? You can imagine a group of us in admissions committee having conversations around soft skills and whether those students would be prepared for our classroom, right? And so those are the things you should be thinking about and doing the active work and contributing now. We were joking before this call as well, how AP exam scores don't matter after the summer, after the summer before you arrive at university, right? That's really the only power that they hold, right? As soon as you arrive, those scores mean nothing, right? Whether they're transferring for credits, that's it, they're done. They've done their job. And so knowing that life is bigger than those things, right, will help you reflect on those softer skills, those other pieces, which will only strengthen your application, show us you're a well-rounded human and that you're prepared for this university experience.
Yeah, we were talking before this call about AP exams, because I know many of you on this call are a little bit worried about them. And several of us were like, we don't even remember the scores that we got. And I'll go ahead and say and just admit right out in front, embarrassingly maybe, that I got a 2 on my AP chemistry exam. And I remember thinking, oh, that was kind of dumb, but it didn't impact anything. It didn't impact my college admissions. It didn't impact my college experience. It didn't impact what I do now. Like, I'm not a chemist. If at the time I was supposed to be a chemist and I got a 2, maybe it would be a little bit more devastating, but it wasn't. Even then, I'm not sure it would have impacted my future success. So I do want to kind of reassure everybody that there are certain things that we work really, really hard on in this season of our life for some reasons, but it may not be the skill that you actually need to continue to develop. Your perseverance in studying is something that is important, right? But the actual number that is presented on there, that doesn't tell Nick or Karen how much perseverance you had. And so, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, on the call earlier when we did the poll, there were probably half of the students were 10th graders, and then half of them were juniors. So there's a kind of a different thing I want to focus on for each group. So for the younger students, what advice do you have in terms of developing kind of your skills and story? I think somebody said in this chat, like, knowing who you truly are is really difficult. And we as adults continue to kind of think through, who are we? We don't know who we are. So, but what are what words of advice do you have for kind of 10th graders who are really just starting to discover who they are, and how they should allocate kind of their focus and time as they're doing that?
Yeah, I would say know that we don't expect you to know who you are. Certainly, I think none of us were self-actualized human beings at the age of 14, 15, 16. And so we're not expecting that of you. We understand if interests shift and change. And I think, I mentioned this because a question I get a lot is like, oh, I changed activities from my 10th grade year to my 11th grade year. Is that okay? Like, is that going to be a red flag? It's like, yes, of course that's okay. We expect that your interests are going to shift and change. And maybe you found something completely new that you'd never experienced before. And you were like, oh yeah, I want to spend some more time on that. So just know, I think that we're expecting this of you. We're expecting that sort of thoughtfulness of trying to figure out who you are, how you fit into this world, where your interests lie. And we recognize that that's just not going to be an overnight process. And so seeing evidence of that in your application can be really helpful as well. I think right now you're living your story. It can be hard to figure out what that story is. So even just almost taking notes to yourself of saying like, yeah, this is what I'm really enjoying about this activity, or this is something I really appreciate about this particular class, so that when it comes time to tell your story to admissions officers, next year when you're, thinking of applying to schools, you sort of have that continuity almost of how you've developed throughout your time in high school. But I think not worrying about right now, having that all sorted out.
One of my favorite TED Talks that I've ever seen is by Chimamanda Adichie, who is an author and poet, who speaks to the power of the single story, right? This idea that people assume that there's, one trajectory forward for themselves, and how we make assumptions based off of this one trajectory, right? Ultimately, the conversation ends up being about assumptions and how we assume that because someone is this, they have these stories associated to them. But the world is so much bigger than that, right? As we've seen, look at how movies are. Everyone is obsessed with the multiverse right now, right? Because everyone wants the potential to do everything, right? And so that's what we're trying to set you up with. These skills allow you to do whatever you want. And we want you to do whatever you want over the course of your life, right? Whether that's changing your identity professionally, educationally, personally, right? Political values, right? Whatever things you're thinking about, right? We want you to be able to see those skills, assess those skills, and apply them to your life or lives, right? You're going to have multiple competing interests, parallel interests. At some point, someone mentioned in the chat, I think, adaptability as one of the soft skills that we think about. Why do we care about adaptability? Because we don't want you to have a single story, right? We want you to be able to explore the multiverse in whatever way, shape, or form makes sense to you. And so you're not supposed to have these answers because the three of us don't have these answers, right? And we might pass away not having these answers, right? Life is about figuring those things out one step at a time. But you can only do that if you have invested in the skills, invested in the conversations and spaces that allow you to do so. Again, this is a very lofty conversation today, right? We're not talking about the puzzle pieces of admissions. We're talking about why we build the communities that we build, right? This process is looking for different types of students of different backgrounds who value different skill sets, but at an institution that specializes in supporting those very specific skill sets, right? Those communities are going to have different compositions of skill sets in different ways and shapes and forms every year. And that's really exciting to us as admissions professionals, right? We get to respond really meaningfully to the applicant pools that we see every year, right? And how the different trends of the world impact the skills that students want to demonstrate or to build. We then want to identify those students that are going to allow those skills to really thrive on our campuses. But we know that wherever you end up, those skills are going to really allow you to flourish, right? Don't go into this process saying, I am only going to do this. I'm only going to do this for the rest of my life, because chances are you're not. And we want to set you up for the mental resilience and diligence and adaptability, right? All these words we keep saying in order to be successful.
So there are parents on this call as well, and I am a parent of a 10th grader, so I'm very much in the thick of this as well. And often I hear these like murmurings of like, there's got to be the extracurricular activity that showcases it all. Or and somebody even told me like there's I can't remember the phrase, there's a Chinese phrase for it, but it is basically kind of brand name extracurricular activity, or these like, and I kind of want to bust that myth with you all today, in terms of like, like you'll have people who say like you have to do Model UN because that shows leadership, or that shows debate skills or communication skills, or and is can you talk about like how there is not a brand name extracurricular, there is not one extracurricular that like makes somebody an automatic shoo-in?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we admitted everyone that did Model UN, we would fill our class many times over. Yeah, so there's really no checklist that we're comparing against. There's no, I tell students there's no silver bullet. It would make our jobs easier if it were, but there's really not one thing that we're looking for. Instead, going back to that consideration of what you're gaining from those experiences. And maybe Model UN is that for you. Fantastic. Tell me all about it. But maybe it's, I don't even want to list activities because then people are going to think that those are the ones instead. But whatever it is for you, it's more about what you've gained from them instead of just like a check mark, like, okay, done this activity. Yeah, that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. So are there examples of things that, well, okay. Oh yes, thank you. The person told me that it is, the Chinese phrase is like the 24K gold activity or the 18K gold activity. Thank you. Yeah, like I think people are always like asking the question of what is that gold activity that's going to make us, shine in the application. And I want to kind of, I want to talk about this. Like, it's not the activity that makes you shine. It's the skills that make you shine, right? It's the skills that you're exuding. And those can be coming out in very everyday kind of activities versus a gold activity. I've heard people talk about, taking care of their siblings, or having a part-time job, or just, even your journey in, taking a certain class, like the way that you selected your courses, things like that. So I know everybody wants to know, like, okay, well, how do I show these? How do I show these? And how, what recommendations? So for the juniors, especially as they're getting their applications ready, what advice do you have to them in terms of authentically telling you about these soft skills or showcasing them, and what works, what doesn't work?
I think this is a great transition, because what I was just going to say too, right? You were saying how the skills are what we care about, but in the application, the make or break it moment is how you communicate those experiences, because you could develop those skills and then completely miss the opportunity of communicating those skills to the admissions committee. And then we still have none of that information. And so I think that was a great transition to talk about this authenticity, right? Because that's the crux of this process, being able to look at your application, make a list of the skills and values that you have, and then make sure that your application reflects each and every single one of them somewhere, right? And so I think you have to think of this process very surgically, very intentionally, right? Cut out puzzle pieces for yourself, if that even helps you, right? Cut out some big puzzle pieces on a piece of paper, write the part of the application and the goals that you have for that section of the application, right? Fit it all together. If you're a visual person or a tactile person, right? Someone who wants to, physically manifest all these different things, and then make sure that each section of the application met the goals that you've set for yourself, right? It's really important for you to maximize each space, right? Not just clinically approach it from, oh, I need to list my extracurriculars. Why do you need to list your extracurriculars? What do you want the admissions committee to look at or think about or really come away with when we look at that list? Similarly for your essays, right? I always say, leave your essays to the last part of your application, but do them far earlier than your deadline, right? You need to prepare for it, but you should reserve that space for last, because it's a space that you can truly own. You can use, creatively, flexibly, adaptably, right, to reflect on pieces that might be missing, right? It's the one piece you can kind of shape and size it and move it around in ways that could be missing. Missing goals or skills or values or experiences that you haven't shared yet in other parts of your application. And so you really have to do the work to think about, all right, this is who I am right now, right? Knowing that I'm going to change. What are the skills I want to continue developing, right? You have to put together an intentional college list, one that's going to really align with your goals, values, and skill sets, right? That's before all of this, you have to start with that. Then you have to put some goals together for each section of the application. My transcript, the goals I have for my transcript are to show the admissions committee that I have taken rigorous courses, I succeed in these areas, and that the courses I'm doing the best in relate to my academic interests, right? Some straightforward goals, but you can at least know and control that part of your story, right? Another great one, resumes, not resumes, letters of recommendation, right? You can still set goals for those, right? Talk to your teachers proactively about the skills you want them to reflect on in those letters, right? We oftentimes assume that letters of recommendation, we don't own it. We have to just trust that they're going to do it. It takes ownership, it takes initiative, it takes communication to talk to these people who are writing letters of recommendation for you. And that is a skill that you will carry with you for the rest of your life, right? When I'm writing letters of recommendation for my staff members, for other jobs, for other experiences, for grad schools, I ask them, what do you want from me, right? Why are you asking me of all people? And your teachers, your faculty members would appreciate that. And it allows you to own your story, right? It allows you to control the narrative of what you're sharing in your application. Everything here is about controlling the story you want the admissions committee to have, right? But you need to set those goals for yourself first and then execute those goals with each section of the application.
That's fantastic. So we only have like 10 more minutes. So I want to make sure that we're answering questions. So if you haven't asked your question yet, make sure you put it in the Q&A. And while we're doing that, I am going to share, I asked Nick and Karen to kind of give us some words of advice. And so I will share, because I know some of you prefer having it on a screen. Some of these things we've kind of already touched on, but these are some concrete words of advice as you're thinking through how to kind of showcase and share your story and your soft skills in the in the application. So there are counselors on this call as well, and I wanted to ask Karen and Nick, like, what are some words of advice to your counselors as they're facing kind of parent questions and student questions about what the best way to do is? Like, what advice do you have for them in terms of how to, one, help mold a student and how they're approaching this, and two, what they could potentially do to help you, admission officer, understand the soft skills and context that their students are experiencing?
Yeah, I think if possible, talking to your students, certainly. I'm going to take that advice from the letters of recommendation that Nick just gave. If possible, making an appointment to sit down virtually, what have you, with your student and ask them what their values are in this college process, how they've ended up, finalizing their college list, and what sort of things they want to make sure that you convey in your letters of recommendation. I think that can be really helpful in making sure that you're getting across their story, but then also providing that additional context. As much as the application process is a holistic one, that's absolutely true, it's also a contextual one. So if there's anything that you think would not be explained by the rest of their application, that can be really helpful to provide that context in your letter.
Okay. Thank you for that, Karen. And so we have a lot of questions about the actual statement, the personal statement, and what are the most interesting things that come out of it. But also there's an interesting question about writing and writing skills. I think especially when, and most of our audience is from an international context, and maybe from a country where English is not the first language. So I know a lot of people, when they're writing their essay, get anxious about, I'm being judged by my writing skills or my communication skills versus the content of the essay itself, the meat of it. So can you guys talk a little bit to that? What are you looking for in the essay? Are you actually, are you distracted by the writing ability? Or are you, what are you considering when you look at these?
I think the only time we would be distracted by the writing ability is if it is problematic, right? So there's no effort put in, there's no proofreading, there's no care put into it, right? But I think one of the things we've talked about in this conversation today is context, right? We're not holding you to the same standard of a student who grew up in an English-speaking household in the United States, right? In their English ability, right? We do want to make sure that you're going to be successful in our spaces at our universities. So at some point, the ability to write, your English fluency will become an important factor. But there's other ways that you can make sure that the admissions committee can ameliorate that concern, right? There's initial view, there's other tools, right? There's other optional exams that students can submit if you're really worried that the admissions committee is going to be worried about your English fluency. It really only becomes a problem if you are demonstrating that you do not know how to write in English. So if you're worried about your English proficiency, spend the time, have your friends proofread it, write through multiple revisions, ask a teacher to review it, right? You should not be asking your agent, that does not exist, right, to use that. You need to write this essay and you need to ask the resources around you for help in that. What we care about is the story you're telling us and how it answers questions that we might still have, right? So if your application says you're interested in this academic area, but you haven't talked about it elsewhere, maybe that's the time to talk about it. Or if there's a really important memory that's shaped your college search process, that's the time to reflect on it, right? Again, it goes back to those puzzle pieces. We're always asking ourselves which pieces are missing and how can we find that information? And the essay is a great place to find that information. We're only going to get lost in that if your writing ability is truly, truly bad, right? We understand there's going to be some grammatical errors or cultural distinction between how you phrase something, right? You're looking for the phrase that we use, but it's different in Mandarin or it's different in another language that you might be speaking, right? We're not going to penalize you for those things. It's also important to always remember we're looking for content, not we're looking for substance, not just, flowery content. So if you're just using, you're trying to make it sound like you're a really good English writer by just using a lot of big words, don't get lost in trying to be fancy. We're trying to just understand the story you're telling us. And oftentimes the story needs to have more plot than personality, right? It needs to balance a little bit of both of those things.
Thank you. Karen, did you have something to add?
No, I completely agree. I think especially that sort of like thesaurus language can be a little distracting sometimes. And so not trying to write how you think we want you to write, but how in a way that comes naturally to you and that showcases your own voice. But yeah, completely agree with everything that Nick said. And I will just highlight, sorry, that I will say that opportunities like Initial View are really, really helpful for if we do have questions about, English ability in any way, shape, or form. Both the written and the oral components of that can be really helpful for us to supplement the essays.
Great, thanks. Well, I know that we're coming out of, I was going to say countries, but the reality is the whole world kind of acts this way right now. We fill our lives and hours with a lot, and we get really, really busy, and we got to kind of get hung up on certain things that we think we need to be doing. I think like with the busyness, we lose sight of kind of the skills that we're trying to develop. We're just doing the thing. We're like becoming like robots, which is why at initially we're trying to talk about Sapien skills. What we only have 2 more minutes, so I want to kind of end on this. Like, what is your kind of final, parting words, Nick and Karen, for like how do we approach this kind of crazy that we've kind of built for ourselves in terms of like doing a lot of things? And what advice do you have? What kind of parting words, can you give us to focus on the right things?
I think our institutions on this call, many of our peers as well, are going to place value and stake in the students who can pull themselves out of those bad trends, right? Who are just kind of pedaling for the sake of pedaling, right? To be on a bike and can't kind of move the momentum forward. They can't, see a path forward for themselves. We have the luxury of being able to choose pretty much any student we want in our very large applicant pools. And that would be the same for many institutions, right? The world's most successful leaders in the business space and the political space know how to kind of see the path forward, right? For themselves, for their people, for the constituents that they support, right? And that's a skill that is difficult to demonstrate, but is one that is really important to remember, right? And so when you're thinking and you're doing all of these things, you have to do the work to pull back and reflect. Why am I doing this in the first place? What is this moving for my life forward? Or is it serving anyone else around me, right? That could be additive, right? Those are all completely wonderful things to continue doing something. But if your answer is, I don't know, then it might not be the experience or the thing that you need to be investing in at this moment. And I think the students who really stand out in our process understand when to say no, when to say yes, when to take advantage of opportunities. To go back to our time management conversation, right? Know how to allocate the limited resources of their time and energy to those experiences. It's a lot of work, but those are going to be the students who stand out the most. That's a very clinical answer. The more emotional, supportive answer is that we're all going through this experience together. And we have this context, right? We all know we're emerging from a global pandemic. We know that many of our students and counselors and friends in mainland China and around the world are still experiencing this pandemic in very stressful ways, right? Even if it's not affecting us in the same degree of health care, right? Or the same degree of existential dread, it's still affecting us. It's still affecting all of us. And so we, as admissions officers, understand this context, and we know, and we'll carry that with us when we review your application.
Yeah, and I would just say, we all recognize that this college process, this admissions process, it can be incredibly stressful. And I never want to diminish that when I'm talking to students. But I would also encourage you to try to see the positive in it and see this as a way to get to know more about yourself, to really sit down with yourself and have these deep conversations and think about what your values are, what sort of skills you're interested in pursuing in the future, what you want your story, how you want your story to be told to the admissions office. So I understand that, there's a lot going on in all of our lives right now, and especially for all of you who are actively thinking about college applications. But I would really encourage you to try to see the opportunity in all of this. And just remembering that of the three parts of the admissions process, you have complete control over two of them, right? You get to choose where you apply. You don't get to choose where you get in. That's the part you don't have control over. But then you do have control over where you choose to enroll. So really focusing on those elements of control and being able to say, okay, this is how I'm going to make an impact, I think can help mitigate some of that stress.
Thank you so much, Nick and Karen. I appreciate everybody who does Tuesday Talks, but I asked you some hard philosophical questions and you guys just are willing to have authentic conversation with us. So I'm really, as always, very delighted to work with you all, and I'm excited that you were able to be here today, tonight, this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are. And I'm going to let you two go on to your busy days. So thank you so much for coming. Again, for all of you who've come to Tuesday Talks, there are some questions about values and how do you know if the school you want to go to is the fit, the right fit. And thankfully, next week's Tuesday Talks is about values and how they matter, both on the side of the admissions off college or the college itself, their values, but also your own personal values and how those align. So do come back next week for that. And for those of you who want to stay on, I'm going to stay on for another 20 minutes to talk about initial view specifically. Like if people have questions about the interview process and how to demonstrate your soft skills through that, you can stay on. I'll be here. But Nick and Karen, thank you so much for staying on with us, and have a great night, day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
All right, for those of you who want to stay on, I'm here. So, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions about the process for initial view. In case you all don't know, for those of you who are kind of joining Tuesday Talks for the first time, initial view is an interview platform. We actually have live interviewers who talk to you, who ask you questions. And in that interview is recorded, and you have agency to send it wherever you want to send it. So if you want to talk about that, I'm here to talk about that. So, and I know that some of you might be transitioning to the Chinese stream. If you want to hear about this in Chinese, go ahead and go there. But if you prefer to have it in English and have me answer the question, I'm here as well. So I'll give it a couple seconds to see who is going to stay on. If you have a question right away, you're already like, I have a question about initial view. Go ahead and put it in the Q&A. And you can go ahead or put it in the chat, and I'm happy to answer. All right, for those of you, some of you are asking, like, how long is this interview? The interview is generally about 15 minutes, and it is a back and forth conversation. It's not a robot asking you. I have really great trained interviewers who've been doing this for years. Many of them have talked to at least 1,000 students, and so they're very good at this job. They don't do any judging or evaluation. They are not the admissions office, so they are not going to be taking notes on how well you did. They are just there to make sure that they have a good conversation, and they're going to ask you questions to make sure that you highlight some of those things that we talked about today on our session about these skills that are hard to measure. You can't get a grade in leadership, and you can't get a grade in communication skills. You can't get a grade in adaptability, but you are able to tell that story in your interview. So but 15 minutes is a short amount of time. So you got to kind of grab that time. And while you're not the one who can control the conversation completely, you are able to kind of give little tidbits of your story to the interviewer to make them excited and engaged and keep asking you questions about the things you want to talk about. Our interviewers are not college students. Our interviewers are actually former admissions officers, former college counselors, former teachers or current teachers. We have some current teachers who are interviewers. They all graduated from great colleges and universities in the United States. They are great listeners, great communicators, and they will smile the whole time so that you are not nervous. We don't offer mock interviews we do actually offer mock interviews on some level. We don't do training per se, but we do have something that we call junior interview. And junior interview is an opportunity for you to do an interview in your junior year with one of our interviewers. The whole process is almost exactly the same. And an admission officer will actually give you feedback about it after you're done. It'll just be like a couple minutes of feedback, but they'll give you some concrete feedback about, like, it was great that you talked about this. Maybe you could talk about this next time, that kind of thing. So if you want to do that, now is the time to do a junior interview if you are a junior. And you get to watch that. You get to show it to your counselor. You get to show it to your parents, and they can talk to you about it and maybe think through, like, oh, you talked a lot about things that are already on your application. So maybe let's talk about some things that are maybe not so clear on your application. It's a great way for you to get an experience with a stranger. I think you are welcome to do mock interviews with your counselors, with your teachers, with your friends, but sometimes doing it with a stranger is the best way to kind of do it. The wonderful thing about mock interviews is that, and the wonderful thing about interviews in general is that it is not something that ends at college application. You will be doing this type of thing for the rest of your life. I am doing what I consider interviews almost every day when I am talking to new people about what we do. When I'm trying to do a sales pitch, when I am doing, when I'm advocating for my kids at their schools, this is like a skill that's going to be really helpful to you regardless of college application. What are the interviews generally about? The interview is completely about you. So we don't need to know, for example, we don't need to know about Model UN because like the activity itself. What we're trying to do when we ask a student about Model UN, and I'm just using this example because it's top of mind, but you don't have to do Model UN. But why we're asking about it is because we're trying to figure out what you like about it, what you're good at, what you spend your time doing. And so the interview is completely about you. So the first question of an initial view interview is usually just not it's a kind of a softball question. It's just like, what did you do yesterday? And you have the opportunity to kind of grab that and be like, well, yesterday I studied for this because this is something that I love. Or yesterday I went and got together with some friends because blah, blah, blah. And then you're talking about your friendships, your relationships. You have an opportunity to kind of put out there what you want to talk about, the first question. Then the interviewer is kind of going to go through a lot of different things to make sure that all the sides of you are being talked about. I would say when you're thinking about how to approach the preparation, think about something academic that you're proud of. Think about something in your extracurricular life that you're proud of. Think about maybe some impact you've made or somebody made on you in your school community and in your greater community. Maybe think about one or two things that you're proud of character-wise, like, something that makes you a friend to others, like why people like you, what they would think of you, or how they would describe you if they were asked about you. So these are the types of things that the interviews are going to be about. And but it's not a test. We're not going to ask you some crazy question that you shouldn't know the answer to. Like if we ask you, like some of our example interviews that you may have seen are talking about like world politics, and you might be worried like, oh no, they're going to ask me about world politics. No, the only reason why the example had something about world politics is because that student was very excited about world politics and he kind of brought it up, and that's why our interviewer kept asking. So let's see. There's a question about how to sign up for junior interviews. So let me just pull that up for you. And while I'm pulling it up for you, other questions. Any other questions? Sorry. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Whoops. Sorry. Can you all see that? Can you all see that? This is a junior interview. Now, for a good time to do the junior interview is right now. We do junior interviews between February and June 30th. So because we want people to do it before they actually do their real interview for application. So now would be the time to do junior interviews. When is a good time to sign up for regular interviews? When you're applying. If you're ready to do it, I would say go ahead and sign up now. And we have, times in the fall that you can go ahead and sign up now and just grab the time while you can. I would say that if you are not sure what to talk about, then maybe you do the mock interview, you do the junior interview, or maybe you just have like a reflection activity with your counselor or a teacher and just kind of think through what your story is. Some students like to do the interview right after summer vacation because during summer vacation, they may have gotten a chance to do some cool activities or gotten a part-time internship or job, and it gives them a little bit more opportunity for storytelling. But really, if you kind of know who you are or you know what you've done, you're welcome to do the interview anytime. I would say the latest that you should be doing this interview is 3 weeks before your deadline. I would say 3 weeks before your deadline is the last kind of last possible time to do it. I always recommend people to do it early because this is kind of, I think, maybe the easiest part of your application because you're just talking and you're just being yourself. And if you do a good job the first time, then you're done and don't have to worry about it. And if you didn't do a good job and you felt like, oh, that was awkward or I didn't quite know what, I kind of got lost in my conversation and wasn't focused, you will then have time to do it. Now, our new rule is you can only do an interview once every 14 days. So you don't want to be doing it 3 weeks before your deadline, because then you only have 1 week before your deadline if you start it, and we have a processing time and that might not get there in time. The way that Initial View works is that we actually have a pretty tight integration with most admissions offices, which means when you do the interview and when you submit it to a school, it automatically goes to your file. And then the admissions office is actually able to see that you have an initial interview when they're reading your application. So I always tell people you want to submit right around the time you're submitting your application, because you want the first reader to have access to it. A lot of admissions officers, they will tell me that if they see that Initial View tab on your file, they're going to go ahead and click play, listen to it in the background while they're reading the rest of your application. That is where they get to hear about the perseverance, right? If they're looking at your transcript and they say, oh, great, straight A's, but they're also listening to you talking about the hard work that you put in, and how, COVID was difficult and you weren't able to study the way that you usually would want to study, or maybe your Wi-Fi wasn't working, and they're listening to that in the background while looking at your transcript or while looking at your essay. They're definitely going to have a full picture and understand, wow, look at the perseverance. Wow, look at that stress management. Wow, look at that adaptability, because that gives color to what those numbers on your file are. So definitely do the interview in time to make sure that it's submitted at the time of your application. There are schools that are going to ask you for interviews after you submit the application, and that's fine too, but why not be prepared and just have it out there before they ask, because then first reader gets access to it. Any other questions? Let's see. I will tell you kind of, there are some questions about advice on what not to do. And the thing that makes me sad when I watch these interviews is those that are over prepared. And when I say over prepared, I mean that they have written out an answer and are trying to read it somewhere. One of the soft skills that we in this COVID age are developing is learning how to engage with someone online. That is something that when I was applying to college, I didn't have to worry about. we were worried about engaging with people in real life. We are now in this day and age where engaging with someone online is actually a skill that you're developing. And it's easy to be like, oh, well, I can hide behind my screen and I can have the different windows open and I can have a piece of paper next to me and I have notes. The thing is, you can probably tell when I'm having an authentic conversation with someone, or if I am reading something or distracted by someone or something like that. So these are kind of skills that are new and that are hard to develop. But what I've noticed is that some students will try to read something in the back and you lose your personality when you do that. Even if you're a good actor, I feel like you lose your personality because you're no longer engaged in the conversation because you're too busy remembering a paragraph. That maybe the interviewer, because he or she is a real person, she's nodding, she's smiling, she might interject with another question or say mm-hmm. And you need to be able to kind of respond to that. And if you're memorizing a paragraph or reading, even worse, reading a paragraph, you're going to miss all those little nuances. Those are the Sapien skills. Those are actually kind of what makes a difference. I always give this example, and I'm going to give it again tonight. There was one student that I watched his interview, and he was kind of your stereotypical math geek. He wasn't a very bubbly person at all, but he was very, very interested in math, and he had written a whole extended essay about chess and math. Now, when he was talking about it, he started kind of going high level with chess, and then he paused and he looked at the interviewer and he said, "Wait, do you play chess?" in that moment for me, that set him apart from some of the other interviews I watched. Why? Because he paused. He realized I'm talking to a real person. And if he or she doesn't understand chess, he's not going to understand everything else I'm talking about. So him saying, do you play chess? And the interviewer saying, oh yeah. And he's like, okay, great. Because then you know that the knight needs to move this way. And then he was able to keep going. This is the smallest nuance, but this is the skill that's going to make that person successful in the future, because you could be the smartest person in the world and not be able to communicate that to others, and not be discovered or noticed or be able to contribute. So that would be, what not to do is do not read, do not memorize. You know the stuff, have it in your brain, the stuff, but then take that piece of paper that you wrote it all down on, throw it away, and then just have a conversation with that person, because that is what brings your application to life. And that is what's going to get you an internship when you get to college. That is how you advocate for yourself when you are looking for a research opportunity. That is how you look for a job when you're done with college. That is my little soapbox spiel. Thank you so much for staying on with me. It's always so fun to see people hanging on. You are all welcome to email contact@initialview.com. Whoops, I'm going to type that to everyone. And if you have more questions, if you are like, oh, I need to hear more about this, or I need my mom to hear more about this, or I need my counselor to hear more about this, I need my students to hear more about this, do email us, because we do info sessions all the time for parents, for students, for counselors. And we'd love to have that conversation with you. And we also have lots of recordings on our website. So if you have more questions with that, you can always go back to those recordings. And please do come back next Tuesday. We're actually going to have a double header next Tuesday, so look out for emails. We're going to have one conversation about values, and we're going to have a second conversation for those of you who are worried about the cancellation of AP exams and IB and A level. We're going to have a conversation about what to do now that the tests are canceled. So do come back. I'll see you next Tuesday. Have a great night, everyone.